Hi, I'm Melissa Muir. Welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. In this video, we are going to tackle the next project in the Revere Professional Making Jewelry book, and that is Project 11, the Gallery Ring. Let's get started now. Now to begin this project, what I need some 1.2 millimeter sheet. Now I didn't have that, so what I did was I took some of my scrap silver, melted it down, and I've now rolled it out to 1.2 millimeters. So that's something that you can think about doing if you don't happen to have the right size of metal to begin with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this sheet up so that I have two pieces that can then be laminated together, and I'm just going to do that with some glue. So I'm going to use my scribe and maybe a straight edge, and I can come into here and mark where I want to cut this sheet. So there's one line, move this guy over a little bit, and give myself another line. And now I'm going to cut this and I'll glue these two pieces together. To laminate these together, I'm just going to use some Elmer's glue, which is just kind of a white glue. So I'll spread that on here and kind of make it thin, spread it all the way out. Just like so. I don't want it to be too thick. Now another thing that I did prior to this, and I hope you guys saw that surface on my piece, was that I actually took a piece of Scotch-Brite and gave it a nice surface so that it was nice and even. So now that I have this, I'm going to put the two together and I'm going to leave them. Now this can take anywhere for up to like 24 hours to really dry. So this is something that you're going to want to do beforehand. Now another thing that I found kind of helpful is if I just take a little clip and clip it together, and that way things don't move and it's held nice and tight. And I'm going to put another clip on the other side, and that will keep everything really even. The other thing that I have also already done is I have created my template for the ring that we are going to be creating. And you want to make sure that when you make this template, you spend some time to really get it good. You want to make sure you file the edges down. You also want to check all of your measurements on here. So what I'm after is a 1.8 millimeter for the thinnest spot in each of my little segments on here. And all of these measurements are in the book. Now in the book it does incorrectly say that the pattern in there is 100%, and that is just not the case. It is definitely not 100%. So you can take it and you can print it or copy it out of the book and reduce it down, or I will also include a link to where you can download a template that should be 100%. However, when you print it out, it's just going to be determined by your printer settings themselves. So you may need to manipulate and play with that just a little bit. Once the glue has had a chance to set up, then I'm going to take my pattern that I've created before, and using my scribe, I'm just going to scribe that design onto this plate that we've just created. I want to be very careful about how I do this so that I'm nice and precise. So hopefully you guys can see this okay on the video. I know it's difficult to see because it is kind of light and reflective, but you can definitely see my pattern has now been scribed into here. Next step is to drill a hole in the center and pierce this out. So now that I have my hole drilled in here, you can see that it's inside of my design of my piece here. Hopefully you guys can see that on the video. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to thread my blade through this hole that has been created in here. So I'm going to slide that in here and tighten up my blade again. I like to add just a little bit of lubricant to my blade. And what I'm going to do is just work my way around that ring, being certain to stay on the inside of that pattern that I've created for myself. And what I will do is make certain that I just go straight up and down, up and down. And it's very important that at this point in time, I take the effort to make certain that my blade stays nice and perpendicular so that both rings are exactly the same. So now that I have my hole, you can see it's not totally even, and what I need to do now is use my files to clean this up and make it so that it's a bit more even and everything lines up the way that it should. Once you have your circle cut out and you have made sure that it's all true, you've checked your measurements, now it's time to cut the outside of your ring. So again, you want to just kind of follow along that guide that you have created, and you're ready to get to the next step. Once I have the rough shape here, then I'm going to take my files and smooth everything up and make sure that everything is perpendicular and that everything is to the right size. Once I get things kind of cleaned up, then I will start to take my caliper and start to measure where I want this measurement to be is 1.8 millimeters. So right now you can see I'm at 2.39. So I have a ways to go before I hit that 1.8 millimeters. Again, 2.47 and 2.5. So I have a little ways to go before I'm ready to pull this ring apart. So spend some time here, clean up these edges, get everything nice and neat. Again, don't go too far without checking your measurements. So file a little bit, and then especially if you're getting really close, you want to file a little bit, come back in and check that measurement, file a little bit, and check your measurement again. Now that I have the rest of this ring pretty much shaped out, I need to concentrate on where the pearl is going to go. So I have the inside that's already done. Everything is lined up properly. I've got it nice and smooth. I've checked my measurements. Again, we're looking for 18 millimeters inside and 1.8 millimeters at the thinnest point on each of the sides, and we are currently there. So the next thing I need to do is take a file into this inner portion and work on this. Now in my case, I actually have a lot of metal to remove in here. The blade that I used to cut this out was rather thick, so it had a hard time following this smaller curve. I could take a smaller blade and recut, or in this case, I'm just going to take a round file that's pretty coarse and actually try to remove some of the metal this way. Then as I get a wider circle in here, I can then pull in a half round file and finish this up. Again, it's important that you keep your blade perpendicular so that it's straight up and down. And then I also like to kind of either come up from the other direction or flip my piece over so that way everything stays nice and even from top to bottom. What I like to do while I'm trying to carve or sand out this groove for my pearl, I'm going to test fit it on my pearl. So I'll just take my pearl and set it right next to it, and you can see here we're definitely not far enough. This is about a 6 to 6.5 millimeter pearl that I'm going to be using, so I still have a ways to go. So as I continue to file this out, I'm just going to continue to come back in and test fit my pearl until my pearl will actually fit in there. Now I'm going to do it this way because everybody's pearl is going to be a little different, especially if they're natural pearls. They're very rarely perfectly round. So you want to just take some time to make sure you've got this set up properly. Once you have a fairly decent or a good fit on your pearl, and you can see here where we actually have a very nice fit, and it does take a while to get that. I want to test it with both sides, make sure that I'm not hitting anything and that the pearl is going to nestle just nicely into into that area for our ring. So now that I have this, I've got a nice kind of an even finish on everything. It is time to take this up to more of a polish. You especially want to take the time to polish the insides of that ring, because once you get them put together, you will no longer be able to get into the inside. When it comes to filing on a curved surface, it can be a little bit tricky and a little difficult to get everything even. So what I want to show you is kind of how I hold my file. So I want my file to be an extension of my hand here. And hopefully you guys can see this in the video, but basically I'm creating kind of a long, straight line all the way through to my elbow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this in alignment first, my file with my finger and my hand. Then I'm going to bring it into the piece. I want to be sitting kind of natural. I want to use nice, long, curved strokes. So I'm bending at my wrist as I come up to do this. I want to bring this up in nice, curved strokes, and I keep everything nice and even. You want to use the entire surface of your file, coming up and around. And you should be able to see if you're off anywhere. This isn't a race, so take your time. Make sure you watch what's happening with your file. If you need, you can turn your piece over the opposite direction and continue again. This, for me, I find helps me to have a more even surface, and I tend to be in much more control. Notice again that I'm holding the piece from underneath the bench pin, so I support my fingers on the top, or well, the top of my fingers on the bottom of my bench pin. And I want to do that for all the outer surfaces. So once you're done with that, you can then get your ring pulled apart. Now if it doesn't come apart easily, you can soak this in some hot water and that will go in and dissolve the glue. And once you open it up, you may have to still kind of remove some of that glue as well. So I'm going to remove that glue and I'm ready to start moving into my polishing of both the inner and the outer rings. To make certain I have a good surface on the inside of my ring, I'm just going to place this onto a sandpaper board. In this case, I have 320 grit, but you could start with 220 as well. And I just want to run in a figure 8. This is going to help ensure that all of that glue is removed, and then I've got a nice surface on the inside of my ring. So I want to pick this up, double check, make sure I don't have any high spots in here. And I have just a couple, so I'm going to do just a little bit more. And that's actually looking a lot better, so I will set that one aside. I'm going to repeat that same process on the other ring. And again, it's looking good, but there's a little bit more that needs to be removed, so I'll repeat. I'm not going to worry about the outside of the ring at this point in time, because I will do that once everything is all soldered together. Now that everything is even, I am going to move to the next lower grit, and I'll continue to do that and go all the way through my polish. In addition to polishing this surface of the ring, these are going to become the inside of my ring. So I want to make sure that that's nice and polished now because I won't have access to it. I also want to make certain that where I'm going to have the seat of my pearl is also nice and polished in there. To get the inside curve of where the seat of our pearl is going to go, I'm going to use a couple of different things. So one is kind of a silicone tip that has been impregnated with some grit into it that's going to help even out the surface and clean this up. In my case, it actually happens to fit very, very well into where that seat is going to be. In addition, then I'll use a felt buff with some polishing compound to give it that nice polish on the inside. One thing to do is make sure that you've got some protection, some kind of a mask, and some type of eye protection as well. Now that I have this nice smooth surface that is pre-polished, now I'm going to switch over to my felt tip here. I'll charge it with a little bit of polishing compound and I should be finished. So next thing I'm going to do is take these over to the sink, use some soap and hot water to clean these up. Make sure I've removed all the polishing compound and the oils so that we can be ready for soldering. For the next section where we're going to solder the two rings together, what I need now are two pieces of wire. One is 1.7 millimeters and one is 0.7 millimeters. Now I happen to have a draw plate, so I can draw down the 1.7 millimeter. So I would start with probably like a 14 gauge or like a 1.9, 2 millimeter wire and pull that down to my desired size of 1.7 millimeters. If you don't, 1.7 millimeter is approximately 16 gauge square. So you could also use that if you don't happen to have the draw plates or the ability to get that wire down. Now, in my case, my draw plate does not go down to 0.7 millimeters. So what I have here is I have a wire that is 0.98, so about 1 millimeter. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to flatten this. Now, I need to start off with a fairly flat piece here. And what I'm going to do is just use kind of my dead blow hammer to help get that all down nice and even. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take another steel block and place it on top. Now, another thing that you could do is roll this through your rolling mill. That will work as well. But what I'm going to do is just give this a couple of taps. I'll pull this out. Going to measure it. So now I actually have two flat sides. So this one does not need to be perfectly square. And I didn't make a whole lot of movement on that. So I'm going to place it back down again and repeat until I get to that 0.7 millimeters. And I'm 0.72, which is going to be close enough. And that's going to be good. So we now have our 1.7 millimeter and our 0.7 millimeter wires, and we're ready to assemble our ring. For this next step, I'm going to be using my charcoal block here. I have already taken each of these pieces. So the 1.7 millimeter pieces I've cut into about 10 millimeter pieces, and the 0.7 millimeter piece is now about 20 millimeters. I have taken the time to sand each of these at 400 grit. So the next thing I'm going to do is just put these into a boric acid wash. This is going to help prevent some fire scale or fire stain. So we just need to dip it in really quick and then we'll light it on fire and it will give it that little protective coating. Once that is done, I'm going to use a fine brush and just paint right where I'm going to add each of these elements. So I want these to be kind of in the corner, and this is going to be my flux that I'm putting on right here. And I'll position each of my pieces. So I just want to put these in alignment with the angle that is here on this ring. And the final one goes up here that is going to become our pearl stem. Now, as you can see here, I've added a few little elements here that help hold my stuff down, and that's going to keep things from shifting out of place. Now it's just time to get this soldered into place. I need to be very careful with my torch, especially up here at the pearl stem, so that we don't accidentally melt that. So again, I'm just concentrating on the ring base itself, not on the pieces that I'm soldering, and definitely not on the solder itself. And I'm watching the solder flow. Once I see that solder flow, I want to make sure that I get out. And we look pretty good. So next I'm going to place this into the pickle and get that cleaned up. The next thing I need to do is to trim away the ends on the inside of our ring. Now I'm not going to trim it all the way down to the ring. It's just going to have about like 1 millimeter left in there. So it doesn't need to go completely down flush. But we do want to get the majority of this out of here. Now the next thing that we need to do is to prepare this ring so that we can solder it to the other edge. If you remember, we used 1.7 millimeter here on these bottom ends, but only 0.7 inside of this. So if I tried to solder the two pieces together right now, it's not going to work. And what I need to do is sand this down so that these kind of have the same plane. Now the top portion here is going to become the stem of our, or the peg that we solder the pearl onto. So I need to move that out of the way because I don't want to get rid of that, but I do want to get everything into the same plane here. So what I've done now is I've taken about 1 inch or so of my sandpaper. I've got 220 grit and I just cut it, and what I'm going to do is flip this over because I don't want to sand down the thinner edge, which is at 0.7 millimeter for our peg. And I don't want to remove that or sand that down any further, but I do want to sand these other two ends. So what I'm going to do is place the two side by side, and that's going to keep everything kind of even. And now I'm going to sand this. I'm going to turn it over from time to time just to kind of see where we are. We've got a long ways to go still. And as I look at this, we are actually starting to look really good. So I can always test fit this with my other piece and see how things line up. And it looks like we're actually looking really good. So I'm pretty happy with how things look right there. So I think we're ready to solder the next step. For this next step, we need to hold our ring together so that it doesn't move when we go to do the soldering. And I'm going to do that with a piece of binding wire. Now I've taken this binding wire and I have bent it over and twisted it so that it's going to hold just a little bit better for me. So I'm going to assemble my piece by inserting the binding wire through, and I'll then bend it over and create a twist. Now, the first one's going to be probably the most difficult because we actually want to have everything nice and tight. So I'll start this off with my fingers, and then I will pull the pliers in and get it all nice and tight. So once I've got the first twist in there, I can spend a little bit of time getting things aligned. Now I'm going to continue to twist this until it's nice and tight up against the ring. And I don't want to make it too tight yet because we still have the other sides that need to be done as well. So I'm going to trim this off here. And I'm going to repeat over here on the side and on the bottom. Once I have everything twisted, it's nice and tight, I'm going to just trim these edges just a little bit. I do want to leave a little bit here because what we're going to do is essentially create a little tripod. So I'll take my pliers and I'm just going to bend the ends down. And what this is going to do is allow us to lift the piece so when we go to solder this, then I will be able to get the heat underneath it. So in this case, the soldered end is on the bottom and the unsoldered top or part is on the top. Once again, I'm going to take my ring and put it into that boric acid wash and ignite this to give it a nice little fire coat. Now you might recall that we left a little bit of an edge inside of this ring, and I'm going to use that little inside of the edge to my advantage, and I'm going to place my little chip of solder right there onto those little ledges, and with my heat I will draw it in and out so that it will then solder the top piece onto those stems as well. So I'm going to place just a little bit of flux on these and let that draw in. And then I'll place my pieces of solder. In the case of this one, it is not sitting properly. Inside, I think I trimmed a little too short. So because I still have the end pieces out here, I'll just place it on the outside and again draw that in that direction. Once we have our solder chips placed, we are ready to heat it up and get the solder flowed. I want to be very careful around those wires, especially that post that is going to become our peg, so that I don't melt this. You can also bring your torch in from underneath. And you want to watch for that bead of solder to flow all the way through. So now you're going to quench this and we're going to pickle this. If your iron or binding wire is iron, make sure you clip this away before you put it into the pickle. The next thing I need to do is remove all of the inside pegs that were in here. So we'll just saw those out and then follow up with a file. You also want to cut off the outside ends. You can either do that with cutters or again you can use your saw. The peg in the middle we are going to be leaving for our pearl post, but in the meantime take your file and you can file away each of the different corners and the inside of your ring. When filing the outside portion of this, you want to again follow along the curve of that ring, and you want to do it from both sides so that you have a nice sharp point where the ends of the ring meet. Once we have this done, then it's time to take a little bit of time and get the polish that you want. Now in the book there are also directions of how to put a bevel on here, so you can look at that in the book. It's just an extra little step if you want that edge there. Otherwise you can go ahead and just leave it as is, and you are just about ready to create the post for your pearl. You want to cut this down to about 3 millimeters if you have a 6 millimeter pearl. The final fabrication steps require us to put our polish on here now so that then we can twist our little peg here. Now because it is a square wire or it has a flat, what we're going to do is just take our pliers and give a little bit of a twist to this. And what that will do is it's going to give us some nice surface area for the glue to adhere in here. It gives us a little bit more area, and that way then it's going to be much more likely to continue to hold our pearl into place. Now, one of the things that you want to do is you can try to fit your pearl onto here as well. You need to, if you need to make any adjustments to your peg. So in my case, it looks like my peg needs to be shortened just a little bit. Plus, I'm going to just take the time to round out these edges and then do my final polish. Then we'll move on to the final step of securing our pearl. For this final step, all I need to do now is glue my pearl into place. So you can see everything here has a beautiful polish on it, nice high gloss, and that's what I want for this one. Obviously you can put whatever kind of finish on there you would like. Now I'm doing this on a piece of paper as well because I don't want to get this glue onto my bench top. So I'm just going to put a little drop of super glue right there onto the post, and I'm gently going to be very careful here and insert the pearl into that post. So I'm going to let that glue set for a little while to get finished curing. That's going to take probably, I don't know, maybe just a couple of hours is what I'll leave that for. But now we have our finished ring. So hopefully you like this project. Now again, like I've said before, I'm not a master, I'm working through the book with you. So there's definitely a few little hiccups and things that could be better on my ring. And the next one is going to be even better. With all of the things that I've learned doing the other projects as well as this, we continue to get better and better. Key takeaways on this project is make certain that as you go along in the project that you get the one step done before you move to the next. You don't want to do little portions of steps and think that it's just okay. Take the time now, really develop the skill to get in there, make certain everything is ready to go before you move on, and you'll find that it goes much more smoothly. As always, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments section. I try my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. Again, links to all of the different tools that I use in here and where to find them are also going to be down in the description. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you guys next time.